Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joined again, Mr. Kevin Durso. How are you, bud?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. It's been a minute. I flubbed the intro a little bit, but it's been a while since we've been here. We got a lot to get into today. Huge Flyers trades, huge front office news, huge everything. We're going to start on the Stanley Cup. Before we get into that, follow us on Twitter at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and find us everywhere you find your podcasts, including sportstalkphilly.com. Okay.
So the point of the whole show here is supposed to be that all we were supposed to have to talk about was the Stanley Cup Final, right?
Right. We came in thinking that this was going to be a Vegas heavy show.
Well, our last show was the preview of the Stanley Cup Final.
Whoever won, you know what I mean. But even in the conversations that we were having during the course of the series.
Oh, yeah. But I'm saying, our last show was just the preview of the Cup Final, thinking the next show would be just the Cup Final. Here's who won. Let's talk about it. And a couple of quick hitters on now what happens. Because now that it's over, everything can start to pick up. So we thought. We'll get to that later.
Right. We didn't expect things to happen, right after Game 3. Right. We expected things to happen at the draft. We will get to, like I said, all the Flyer stuff in just a few minutes here, but we do have to start with the Stanley Cup Final. In a series that was not the best series by any stretch of the imagination in terms of competitiveness, although it was fun, it was physical, it was entertaining hockey. The result here, in case you haven't heard somehow here, the Vegas Golden Knights win the Stanley Cup in 5 games.
On this side.
Over the Florida Panthers, lifting the cup on home ice 6 short years into their existence, breaking the Flyers record for the quickest expansion team to win a cup. Congratulations to Vegas, and it really is incredible what a wagon they've put together and how good that team is and how much we talk about teams embodying a city. And nobody embodies doubling down and going for it more than the Vegas Golden Knights. And it finally pays off. They hit the jackpot. They win the Stanley Cup.
I'm going to start counting how many Vegas puns you include in this whole thing. Because no, seriously.
There's too many not to. It's too good.
Seriously, I was actually as I was preparing notes for all the Flyer stuff we're going to get to, I know that I use a line that it's like, oh, this is going to tie all of it together perfectly. It's probably going to be the title of the show when we get to it. You'll probably be able to pick it out if you're listening.
Okay.
But no, I mean, and you know what I was going to bring up kind of to add on to what you just said is, because we talked about this the last time when we were previewing the Cup Final, a pretty much completely different team than when they started. I mean, not a lot of original Vegas Golden Knights on the team. It was 6
of them.
So you turn over more than half your team. It's pretty impressive what they were able to put together in 6 years' time.
Yeah, and out of those 6, by the way, I did want to mention the move by Vegas Golden Knights coach Bruce Cassidy to start 5 original Golden Knights in Game 5, the series clincher at home.
Awesome.
That's a guy who knows how to do all the little things right. And even though they looked like garbage for the first 5 minutes because all their lines were thrown out of whack because we started 5 guys who don't play together, that's okay because that's the kind of thing. It's so important for a franchise in its early days to lay down a good foundation.
Sure.
And that's the sort of thing that legend is built off of, right? When they tell the story of the 2023 Vegas Golden Knights, it starts obviously with the expansion draft, but it ends with those guys in the center of it. It ends with your core guys. It ends with Marchessault. It ends with Riley. It ends with Carlson, McNabb.
Shea Theodore.
They just did everything right.
They do. Oh, yeah. And look, of course, when you're up 3-1 in the series going to Game 5, you kind of have the luxury of let's mess up the lines for the first 5 minutes. And
you have some wiggle room.
So absolutely you do. I guess, do we want to take it from the top and then work our way to the kind of tail end and then the overall reflection, if you will? Because Game 1 was actually a really good game.
A great hockey game. The best game of the series by far. By far.
I don't know if it was the best for me. I mean, because I think Game 3 was a standout too. Because it's the only one that Florida won, obviously. That's but fair. You're looking for competitive. Games 3 and 4 were very competitive too, and I think that helped. But Game 1 was a really good game. Florida scores first, so right away you're thinking, here we go again. The magic run is gonna keep going. Like it was already fueled up to begin with, and now here they go. They take the lead in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final, and then Vegas works their way back, takes the lead. Florida tied it late in the second period, by the way. And I kind of thought at that point in time, maybe watch out for Florida because those late goals are backbreakers. But credit to Vegas, who is, again, we're going to say this a lot over the next 5 minutes. Vegas was so good as a team that they got goals when they needed to. The play that Mark Stone makes for the fourth one, that's pretty much a dagger in the last 6 minutes of Game 1. That the near high stick, but the way I saw it, it was good. It hits the bottom of the blade, so it was good.
It's a weird one.
It's weird, but it's such an impressive play. And I've got a whole section in my notes just on. I made a lot of. If you were following me on Instagram and watching the reels, I came up after Game 5, after the Stanley Cup had been won, and in about 10 minutes, knocked out like 5 videos on different subjects on that team that I was willing to discuss because there was enough to discuss. But Game 1 goes like that, and then Game 2 was total domination. It was such a blowout. It got kind of boring, honestly. And I remember looking at Florida after that game, and as much as I was wondering if they were finished, also wondering, we're thinking of, remember what the Flyers had to do in 2010? And it's like, when you go home, it changes a little bit. See if you can't turn this into the best of 3.
Right.
And Game 3 was almost so close to the way that played out.
Man.
That, okay, like, you watch them find their way back into it, and a really gutsy win on Florida's part, because right away, one of the most series-changing things that happens is in Game 3, because that's when Matthew Tkachuk gets hit, goes down, stumbles off the ice. You're thinking concussion. Turns out he did go through protocol, but that's not what it was. And crazy. He misses what, a full period between when the hit took place and when he finally comes back and all stuff like that. And then, oh, by the way, and of course now even more impressive, knowing what we know now, scored the game-tying goal, is driving the net on the game-winning goal. It's like,
and there's no reason to bury the lead on that, by the way. In case you haven't heard, he
fractured sternum.
Yeah, and played all of Game 4 with fractured sternum.
Right, and then had to miss Game 5.
And then couldn't play Game 5 because, hey, by the way, his sternum was broken. Hello. Turns out that's the part that holds your whole entire body together.
The scary part is I don't know if that's the one that gets me the most, or what they said with that Ekblad was going through at the end.
Aaron Ekblad was a zombie. Oh my God!
You want me to read that one off really quick?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, he broke his foot in Game 1 of the opening series against Boston, I believe is what they said. So
yeah, and by the way, hockey skates.
Yeah,
broken foot.
So he played 4 rounds basically on a broken foot. His shoulder popped out twice. They popped it back in. He had a torn oblique, I think is what he had also. So which you only need to be able to move, your body laterally to be able to twist and, kind of contort your body to make movements on the ice. So how he played, I don't know, and you had him. Radko Gudas had a high ankle sprain. There was others. Sam Bennett was dealing with a whole host of things. Eetu Luostarinen had a broken tibia. Like, come on. And he at least didn't play in the cup.
Right. The Florida Panthers really did pay for the physical hockey that they played through the first 3 rounds.
And to me, that's the thing. Like, it was evident once Game 4 was over that they were the walking wounded, and it was pretty, I remember going into that, one of the videos I made, I said Vegas is poised to win this thing in Game 5 because of where it all is. It was collective. The frustration on the part of the Panthers, the fans, look, I'm not trying. We make fun. I know there's a lot of jokes made about Florida.
No, that Florida fan base was great.
They were great until Game 4, when the game's finally over. You didn't have to do that.
That's fair.
That was the only unfortunate part, because for the whole playoff, you were great. You were absolutely outstanding. And all I could think about watching is they're throwing more stuff. And I'm not talking about just throwing the rats. Like, the rats is obvious.
Obviously, I think the rats are fine.
Right. Oh, it is. Well, yeah, sure, because guess what? In Vegas, they're throwing pink flamingos on the ice.
Right, and everything's rubber, and we all know we're all having a good time.
And in Nashville, it's catfish, and we thought that was cool because it's unique to your team. It's like Detroit with the octopus. It's like, okay.
But when we get into cups and cans and etc.
And water bottles and all that stuff. Yeah, don't throw full water bottles on the ice, please, or full beer cans or anything like that.
Don't throw the commemorative light bracelets. Come on now.
Exactly. And I just kind of sat there thinking about it, because I'm like, you know what? It sure feels like that's going to be the last game in Florida. And if it is, that's a really bad way to go out.
Yeah.
That's all.
But it's one of those things that Florida was that team through the entire run that you're still thinking.
Oh, yeah. I know.
If
you're
they
thinking
manage to win.
You're thinking 3-1 again, too.
Well, right. And if they manage to squeak by Vegas, and, obviously the game didn't go their way, Matthew Tkachuk didn't play, it got pretty out of hand. But if you can manage to squeeze through in that game, then you come back, you play game 6 at home, you're going to have all, the fans on your, you're hot, you're going, here we go. And then, of course, anything happens in a game 7. And
in game 6, whenever you play
you just roll the dice.
And whenever you play a game 6 in the Stanley Cup Final, when you're the home team for game 6, everybody in the building knows it's your last home game. There's no tomorrow at that point. There's only one more game to go. It's not going to be at home. So they're bringing their all because this is all that's left, So I get it. But you're right with game 5. Like, as soon as Tkachuk wasn't playing, you knew it was going to be a challenge. And when the first goal was scored and it's Mark Stone shorthanded, and I turned around right away and said, my wife was in the room, and I said, it's over. Yep. I said, it's over. I knew right then and there. And
Matthew Tkachuk honestly made about as good a case a player can make for a skater can make for the Conn Smythe on the losing team.
Pretty close. Yeah. I mean,
because, my God, the entire run, he was incredibly clutch.
Yep.
Every goal he scored seemed like it was an overtime winner, or it set up the winner, or it just, everything Matthew Tkachuk did this run was magical.
I do remember, I guess maybe it was the morning after or something like that, that the voting results for Conn Smythe came out. Somebody did give him a 3rd place vote.
Good.
In terms of that, yeah, even though they were going to lose, obviously, by the time the votes were cast, obviously. Because they do it right up, I think 5 minutes before we're handing out the cup, practically. If there's 5 minutes left in the game, you submit your vote right then and there. And somebody did, at least one I think I saw gave him a 3rd place, because most of it was consistent, and it was exactly the way you would expect it to. So let's go into this. I had a really rough postseason. I don't know about you. I mean, we both picked against them in this final, but you had better picks throughout the course of this thing.
Yeah.
I picked Vegas to beat the Jets and then doubted them the rest of the way through, because I picked Edmonton, I picked Dallas, and I picked Florida, and I got it wrong every time. But I have to give them full credit here, because we've already said it a couple different times. They're just a really talented team.
Aiden Hill. How have we not mentioned Aiden Hill during this conversation?
I have. Now I'm getting into the sections where we talk about all the players.
Insane.
Now, I know there will be talk about how LTIR space was used, and I'm going to say the same thing that I said with Tampa. Don't hate the player, hate the game.
Be mad that your general manager is not smart enough to do that.
If the league allows for such a loophole to exist, don't hate on good GMs and hockey operations departments. And let's shout out the two who we know are behind this one, George McPhee and Kelly McCrimmon, for exploiting it. Don't hate on them for exploiting a loophole that's in the CBA that works towards your advantage. But really, and this goes back to kind of bring everything full circle, the makeup of the team is what I really look at, because the original guys played really well. And I had said, this kind of ties into the Conn Smythe conversation we were just having. Because I remember going into the series, I'd said I really thought it was probably Eichel was in the lead, but Marchessault and Carlson have entered the conversation.
Yep.
And Marchessault had already scored plenty of goals in the playoffs before this series. And then
without scoring a single one in the first round, by the way. Believe it or not.
And then he scored in the first 3 games of the series.
Yep.
So he's a very worthy winner of that trophy. As much as you could have also said, Eichel gets it, Carlson gets it, Stone gets it, Hill gets it. You could have picked plenty of guys, and everybody would have been able to be like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. But Marchessault was a very worthy winner of it.
And there is the original Golden Knight angle, which
it worked out.
It certainly doesn't work against his favor here. But either way, it really was not a very good series. But again, so I think the biggest problem that Florida ran into, real quick, and then we will kind of put a bow on this.
I'm touching on a couple of players with quick notes, and then we'll move on.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. The thing about Florida is, and I mentioned it, is that they had too long of a break, and the magic died, and everybody got to feel all their injuries and went, "Ow, this really hurts."
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do, right? When you beat the Carolina Hurricanes in 4 games, you're not going to look a gift horse in the mouth.
And then while you're at it though, too, I think I would have to assume coming into the series that Matthew Tkachuk was as healthy as you can be.
Oh yeah,
for that time of year. Like you're dealing with bumps and bruises. I get that, but like he didn't have the fractured sternum going in.
Right? No, of course, Vegas absolutely took their pound of flesh in his series.
He took a hit, something happened, and there you go. Right. I want
to bring. One more note on Matthew Tkachuk here before I just shut up about him, because holy crow. The hit on Jack Eichel. Holy cow. Clean as a whistle. I believe it was in game 2.
Well, Eichel's falling, so yes, it's clean as a whistle.
Well, sure, but even the contact was shoulder to shoulder, and obviously Eichel toe picked into it. Mm-hmm. But man, that is about... And I heard high-level people looking at his skates and looking at how he approached it, and I think he actually let up a little bit.
Probably. I mean, but
that's about as hard as you can hit somebody.
Sure.
Like, that was monstrous. And if the series had turned, that hit would have been a non-zero part of it.
Well, all right, so I got a few notes on a few different players, and
then we'll get into Flyer stuff.
Well, and I guess I'm going to start. You kind of segue nicely for me, because I want to start with Jack Eichel, because
he was so good.
No, but man, was it good to see him bounce back the way that everybody, to the form that everybody knew he had. Like this is, and I'll put a Flyers angle on it for this, because it gives me hope about Joel Farabee, not to the Jack Eichel level. Joel Farabee is not Jack Eichel, but it gives me hope that
he will be what he was.
Go through this surgery and come out the other side and look the part.
At least 100%.
And Eichel was so good in this. Like honestly, I really did think they were giving Eichel the Conn Smythe as it got closer to the end, just because of how good he had been consistently throughout. Not that Marchessault wasn't. I mean, Marchessault went on the run right at the right time. And
everybody cringed a little when Eichel took that hit because of the history with the neck and because of how violent the hit was.
But he just came back looking better. I mean, honestly.
He jumped up looking mad. He was swearing his tail off leaving the ice. But then he came back and looked good and said that, for the record, want to give him a ton of credit too, because he said after the game, clean as a whistle. Yeah. Absolutely. Great hit.
Sometimes
you got to respect that.
And honestly, sometimes it's what's needed, because we spend, I'd already talked about this way before, like previous series. We spend way too much time looking at stuff under a microscope in super slow motion to try to determine these things. And I understand the reason that we do it. We do it because player safety doesn't do their job sometimes. And we do it because the officials sometimes get these things wrong in the moment. But it's nice when the player himself who took the hit is sitting here telling you, my bad, I toe picked and my head was down and I took a hit. And it was clean, and I think
everybody kind of universally agrees that hit was pretty clean, and that's especially true when Jack Eichel says it. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So my next point includes Eichel in it, and it includes another player I want to talk about, but this kind of goes back to the front office of Vegas, because one of the things I admire about this team, and I wrote about this the day after, because I do every year, I kind of write a big. Here's the team that won, what you should be looking, because everybody knows it's a copycat league anyway. So, what I admire Vegas for doing is, and I tweeted this too during Game 5, taking big swings, taking the gambles on players, or at least when the opportunity is there, throwing all caution to the wind and saying, we're just, is that guy's available? We're going to go get him, and they did it. They did it with Mark Stone. They did it with Jack Eichel in trades, and they did it with Alex Pietrangelo in free agency. And it was, these are, and here we go. Here comes the line. These are the acquisitions that you make when you go all in.
When you're taking a gamble.
When you push the chips to the center of the table and say, we're going for it, you get guys like that. And Stone had been on teams that have come close. And Pietrangelo was a captain of a Stanley Cup team. And Eichel was talented enough
had never made the playoffs.
No, but was talented enough to be that quality player. And you knew these were game changers.
By the way, do you think he texted Connor McDavid right after they won?
I don't know. I will say on what was it, Friday night or Saturday night? Sorry, the parade was Saturday. He looked like he was having the time of his life though. At the parade.
I could see Jack Eichel just pulling up Connor McDavid, typing out 1-0 send.
I like it though. It'd be pretty funny. So I guess my next player note is going to be on another player I just mentioned, Mark Stone, because I've said this before, I think, on this show. Every team needs that player. Every team should have
two-way player in the league.
Every team should have a Mark Stone on their team. Every team should want the all-around ability that he has, like you said, the two-way ability, his leadership, his passion for the game.
Man, you could see it in the final too.
Everything. He's everything you want in a player.
Every time you see Mark Stone, he's screaming.
Pretty much.
And not at somebody, just pure energy. And Mark Stone, wow.
What
else can you say?
Well, and are you not going to tell me when he scores shorthanded in Game 5, you're sitting there going, who else? Who else was going to do it first? Of course.
Of course we have a Mark Stone shorty. Come on.
All right, last note on a player, and then I do want to get to Bruce Cassidy for a second as well.
Yeah.
But the last player is the guy you said, how have we not mentioned him? It's Aiden
Hill.
Because first of all, it's a great story. He's the fourth goalie that they've used throughout and he was still effective, obviously.
Yep.
But I think the biggest thing to talk about is the save in Game 1. That's the series changer. That's what starts to make you think this time it's going to be different. They were on the opposite end of that save 6 years ago, when they made the Cup Final in their first year. And now it's like, is this what we're going to talk about forever? And I can't tell you how many times I've seen that picture. It's going to be everywhere.
I was going to say, when I talked earlier about franchises laying down foundations and establishing lore, that has to be the save, capital T, capital S. Like, yes. it has to be.
Yes.
As far as the Vegas Golden Knights go, that is the save. As in, the save, parentheses, that won us the cup, parentheses.
Sure.
That's it. End of story. That's the save. Aiden Hill is the guy.
Because all of this happened so quickly, there's a lot of things where you'll be able to title in their franchise's history, like whatever, because they never had a cap. Well, they never had a cap. Go ahead.
You ready for a bold take here?
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to sit up for this one.
Okay. I'm going to sit up too.
As far as the Vegas Golden Knights go, that's the first statue outside T-Mobile.
What's that? Oh, the save?
The save.
Maybe you're right. I mean,
Aiden Hill lunging back across the net. That's just the heel of the stick catching the puck.
But which makes it even more, which kind of made it more impressive than even the Holtby one. It was incredible. But you're right. So that's the save. They'd never had a captain in France. That's true. So Mark Stone is going to be forever the captain,
the first guy. He's their Bobby Clark.
Right. He is the captain.
Yep.
I kind of think
I know Bobby Clark wasn't the Flyers' first captain.
No, I know, but he is the captain now, obviously. I think that among the group of 6, Marchessault winning Conn Smythe probably makes him the original Golden Knight.
I agree.
He's the quintessential original Golden Knight.
And if you go back to that first run, he was kind of the guy during that run too. He was the guy. He was the media guy, right? He was the guy pulling up to games in the Golden Knights colored Lamborghinis that he was borrowing from a billionaire in Vegas.
That's right.
That was Jonathan Marchessault, baby.
Well, did you see
Jonathan Marchessault was the one who bitched to the media about the San Jose call the following year. He is the original Golden Knight.
Well, by the way, did you see the clip that floated around afterwards where he's walking around, he's holding the Conn Smythe, and he looks around and he goes, "Where can I put this thing? Like, guys, seriously, where can I put it?
I want to put it down.
I want to put it down. Where can I put this thing?" Which is great.
Nobody was happier for him than William Karlsson at that parade, by the way.
William Karlsson are like the duo of this whole thing because Karlsson's, I can't tell you the number of times I've seen Karlsson's speech from the parade.
He wins the Chase Utley Award.
That was hysterical.
Drunkest at the parade.
Well, but the speech was hysterical.
Yeah.
It just and again, you could see between the two of them, like all of it, the fact that they'd been here for 6 years and coming so close the first year and then following it up with the journey. Because you're right, the journey is all the stuff with the San Jose series, the losing in conference finals on,
missing the playoffs.
Well, missing the playoffs, but losing in the conference finals in weird circumstances to Dallas in the bubble and then to Montreal in the weird divisional structure that it was.
That's their rock bottom.
missing the playoffs one time.
Right. Twice in their 8-year existence or whatever it is.
Once in their 6.
Once in their 6? Oh, yeah. Once.
Yeah, one time they missed the playoffs, and then they pretty much almost, I mean, not completely, I was not close completely, but they pretty much went, all right, fine, drop the grenade in, let's blow it up, change the coach, blow it up, and we'll win next year. Which, speaking of the coach, I feel really good for Bruce Cassidy, by the way.
Fantastic. I hope the first thing he does on his day with the cup is tweets out a picture of him sitting in the chair the Bruins fired him in. He got fired in his own home. Like, come on now.
Right, and he wasn't the problem in Boston, but it was getting to the point where it was the end of the road there.
Something
and I
had
understand
to change.
that. Like, sometimes that happens. It's not real. Like, to be honest, we could be telling the same story if Florida had won and saying the same thing about Paul Maurice, because what's the only difference is Paul Maurice stepped away from Winnipeg instead of getting unceremoniously fired like Bruce Cassidy did. But it's the same story, right? It's a guy who's sitting here saying, it's just like, it's not going to happen here. I don't know how else to explain it. It's not going to happen. And I can't do any more with this. So it's time.
The more time passes, the more it looks like the players are the problem in Winnipeg as opposed
well, no, I know,
coaching.
but I actually found it impressive, a coach sitting here saying, it's not going to go any further with me, so you might as well try something else because it's not going to happen with me. And
well, I think he knew
it was time.
We all know now.
Oh, sure. But in terms of Cassidy, he got to a cup final in 2019. And it was a Game 7 too, so
that series was awesome.
And oh, by the way, the following year he won the Jack Adams. Like, I think he was always poised to do this in some capacity.
He's a great coach.
He's a great coach. I respect him a ton.
And I think Boston Bruins ownership would tell you that. But again, it's about a new voice in the room, and they took that voice to the President's Trophy. So, like, can you really give them that hard of a time? Now, obviously, there is the whole issue of the first round, but again, that's a whole different issue.
Well,
but okay.
No, and by the way, like, that turns into revisionist history really quick because
I know,
because I saw Boston fans sitting there saying they never should have done that, and I'm like, in the back of my mind, I didn't tweet anything towards it, but I saw other people not defending it, like
justifying
countering it. With
right.
Like, it's not even close to being one of the worst decisions they ever made. Like, it was just time. It happens. Blah blah blah.
Right.
And in my head, I'm going, you realize they don't make the coaching change, they're not winning the President's Trophy and setting regular season records. You realize that, right? Because who knows what Bergeron decides after last year? Krejci's not coming back. Like, it was well known they weren't going to do this anymore.
Yep, they kind of had their.
You wanted to run it back. If you wanted to run it back with a group that you knew was willing to run it back, it wasn't going to be under Bruce Cassidy. So, all right, I know the trade-off isn't what you want. Who cares? We said that at the very beginning, right? Who cares about the regular season records when it ends in 7 games in the first round? Kind of true, but you wouldn't have had all that if not for making the coaching change to an extent, because you wouldn't have had the same team if that's the case.
And, we talk about the Vegas Golden Knights taking risks and making big changes and making these big impact trades. I think it's time we switch over to the Flyers talk, because Danny Briere is trying his best. Obviously, huge trade over the last couple of weeks here. The biggest piece moving out, Kevin, how will the Flyers recover from losing Hayden Hodgson?
You're only bringing that up because you remember his NHL debut so
absolutely. Well. He scored a goal. Regardless,
you were there to see it.
Right. So, in case you don't know what I'm talking about at this point, obviously I'm referring to the Ivan Provorov trade.
Yes.
Ivan Provorov, as of this recording, well, as of a couple weeks ago at this point, is no longer a Philadelphia Flyer. He is a Columbus Blue Jacket. It looks as though he will be playing under Mike Babcock next season. And it looks like Mike Babcock is playing Pokemon with the 2015 NHL draft class and just trying to catch them all. So the trade.
Yes.
The Columbus Blue Jackets acquire Ivan Provorov.
Yep.
The LA Kings acquire Hayden Hodgson, Kevin Connaughton, and in parentheses 30% of Ivan Provorov's contract. Mm-hmm. And the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, Kevin, I'm going to start reading.
Yes.
And I'm going to be reading for a second. So
I know.
The Philadelphia's acquire Cal Petersen, Sean Walker, prospect Helge Grans, Columbus's 2022 first-round pick from the Kings, but whatever, it doesn't matter who it's from. Columbus's 2024 or 2025 second-round pick, and the LA Kings 2024 second-round pick. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 assets that the Philadelphia Flyers received. Kevin, I think that's a haul. How do you think Danny Briere did in his first trade as a Philadelphia Flyers general manager?
I was incredibly impressed with what Danny Briere was able to do here.
Me too.
And it shows more of his vision. It shows that this is, in fact, his show. It shows that he can do this. And
it shows that they're rebuilding.
Well, it does. But the thing that was impressive to me with Briere doing this immediately is, again, like I said, it shows he can do this job. And the reason it does is because you pulled out every card you could possibly pull and went down every avenue to make a trade happen, from salary retention, third team involved, picks, prospects, acquiring other contracts to increase the value of the picks and prospects, right? Like, he did everything. Now, I'm going to say right up front, because the first thing that stands out, obviously, the biggest piece in this deal from the Flyers' perspective is the first-round pick.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to tell you right now, I didn't think there was a chance that they could get back into the first round of this draft. I didn't think it was going to happen at all. So that, to me, is automatically a win for the Flyers getting back into the first round. The 2 additional picks are also huge because we know how much draft capital the Flyers had given up in the last few years.
Yep.
And getting anything back, let alone 3 total draft picks in one shot, is exactly the approach that is needed.
And by the way, not just retention over multiple years.
That too, yes.
2 years left on that Provorov deal, by the way.
And doing it in such a way where it's somebody else is going to help.
Somebody else paid for it.
Right. Well, no, somebody else is going to help pay for it, so that even then it doesn't all fall on the other team. Like, that's very forward thinking of Briere to jump into this thing head first with, like, hey, listen, I got a player who I know I can move. And let's be real about something, okay? Because we're going to discuss a few other players and possible trade rumors and things like that in a couple minutes.
Sure.
And I think that of the bigger name players that could bring back a lot, this was the easiest one for the franchise to move on from, because I think that the writing was also a little bit on the wall. Like, I think anybody else that we talk about, Briere would have a counter argument for, I could trade him, but, and, like, you know what I mean?
But I don't have to because, right.
Right. And he would be justified in answering that question for all of them that we're going to talk about. I think, like, to me, there's 3 of them we're going to talk about specifically.
Right.
And all 3 of them.
Certain names we know are gone. Certain names we know probably aren't gone. But then
certain names we know are possibly gone with not very much leverage. Correct. So you kind of already know where they're headed. These are 3 names we're going to get to, though, that they don't have to. In fact, Briere has already said he's not actively trying to, but he's not turning any phone calls away either, which is exactly what we said the last show, right? You're going to listen, because that's the point. Let's dive back into this trade for a second, though, because I do want to talk about Helge Grans for a second, because I'm not going to tell you that he's going to light up the league or anything like that. He's not that level of a prospect, but he's a solid pickup because he's a 21-year-old right-handed defenseman.
Former second-round pick, correct?
Yes. They aren't easy to find. Like, it's not, you don't find guys who were taken in the first 2 rounds of the draft recently at 21 years old who's a right-handed defenseman that a lot of teams would sit there and say, yeah, I'll take a chance. Why not? Even if he doesn't become much more than maybe second pairing defenseman, maybe even third pairing, you do need to start somewhere with a lot of this. And you need to at least get prospects like this that you can work with, be patient with, and let play through the process. See what you can accomplish with players like this.
Well, and frankly, so many of the Flyers' problems over the last 2 decades can be traced on some level back to poor development. Mm-hmm. So now, as we enter a new era of Orange, as we enter the Danny Briere era, as we enter the Dan Hilferty era, if we're really looking at it big picture,
sure.
Then Helge Grans, I'm looking at Helge Grans as one of the first major projects. And I'm curious to see what happens with him over the next couple of years and where he goes, because this is a guy that you acquired. This isn't a guy you inherited. This isn't a Tyson Forrester. This isn't a, one of these guys in the minors. This is a guy who you signed the paperwork to get him on the team. He is your responsibility. Now make something of him. But regardless of that, I really do think Danny Briere did an incredible job here.
So let's wrap this portion up by talking
absolutely.
about the last two pieces.
Yeah.
Because this is what you have to do to get the other stuff, to get the first round pick, to get the 21-year-old right-handed defenseman prospect, to get 2 other draft picks. You got to do something that other teams feel like helps them out a little bit.
Right.
And LA was looking to move salary, and quite literally they used it all right back up the next day because they re-signed who they wanted to re-sign. They re-signed Vladislav Gavrikov to a contract. And
that
that's
extension
exactly
was
what they
waiting
wanted.
on this deal. So
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm going to start with Sean Walker because this is an easy one to break down. This is also a really solid addition.
Yeah.
Because you're taking on a contract that you should be able to move no problem, right?
If you even want to.
Or at least you should not have a problem assuming it because it's a year left at 265, right? So even whether first of all, it could easily become another draft pick at next year's trade deadline. That's number one. If he fits in well enough that he generates interest, he can get you something in return during a year where you know you're not going to be competitive.
And you can get his number down to 1.3 if you retain half.
And worst case scenario, you eat the whole contract for the whole year, and he walks at the end of the year. And I know you're trying to use, you're going to use everything. And believe me, based on this trade, I think that Danny Briere is going to be smart enough to look for every opportunity to do exactly what this contract allows, which is try to get one more piece in here.
So you're saying he probably would have traded JVR at the deadline?
I don't think that Briere thinks, maybe, I don't know. Does Briere think that this job is as hard as Chuck Fletcher did? Maybe is the point. I don't know.
It's so hard. Nobody calls and offers me anything, guys. Anyway.
And Cal Petersen is somewhat similar. Now, it's a lot more of a cap hit, and it's 2 years left, not 1. So I get that. And so you're going to have this for a while. And there won't be a resolution to the Cal Petersen portion of this trade. I almost wanted to say of this trade tree because that's exactly where my head is when this was going on. But there won't be for some time. But again,
here's the thing: you're not going to be this year. You're going to suck next year too.
Bingo! You're not going to be competitive in the 2 years that you have this contract anyway. So if
frankly, Cal Petersen is fine.
Well, and the main thing for me is okay. Like I think Sean Walker's not near as big of a piece in the deal for hey, we're not giving up a first rounder in a deal unless that, right? Right. I think that Cal Petersen is possibly the ticket to the first rounder.
I think he's the reason you get the first rounder. Absolutely.
So if Cal Petersen is the ticket to getting back into the first round, sure, you eat the contract and make it work for a short period of time. That's how this works.
Well, and it makes your other goalie much more available.
Yeah, and that's where you're going to head, right?
Well, I mean, we have to, right? Like that. Cal Petersen comes in. There's not really a spot for him.
There's options, though.
Sure.
There's realistically 3.
But the obvious answer,
yes,
is that you trade the guy who has the job that Cal Petersen's probably going to have this season. It's split the job, whatever. I think the easy answer.
Even then, I still disagree with you, but okay.
Fine, whatever the roster looks like, that's fine. But I think the easy answer is that you trade Carter Hart.
Right. Okay.
And obviously, there's a lot that goes into that.
Well, we're going to get into all of it. So let's just start with Carter Hart as the first more trade rumor thing because ironically enough, that was one of our key discussions last show was, all right, so do you consider this, all that type of stuff and things like that? And even then, we kind of we already discussed the approach to possibly trading him, the pros and cons of it, the potential hurdles that go around it, because we did touch on that as well. And I'll bring that up again as we kind of go through this. But now there's more noise. I mean, let's put it this way. The same day that Provorov gets traded, we know that comes out, Provorov's getting traded. He's going to Columbus. LA is involved in this deal. Here's all the pieces. We find out all this stuff. And then, oh, by the way, while all that's going on, here come reports also. They're working on a Carter Hart trade.
Yep.
Okay. That's
bombshell.
Right. Well, as if Provorov wasn't enough, because let's be real. And I even think I said this on air. Do you think that who thought that the first move, maybe not that Provorov wasn't going to be moved in the offseason, but who thought the first move was going to be Provorov? I think a lot of people probably expected the first move was going to be Kevin Hayes.
By the way, one more quick note on Provorov just before we completely get off it. That was, in terms of return, that was the perfect first trade in a rebuild. You got a first-round pick. You got some quality assets. You didn't get any super studs, but that's okay because we're restocking the cupboard, right? We talked about that on the last show. You got 2 second-round picks out of it.
Yes. And I will add something else to your perfect first trade thing, because here's another reason why it was a perfect first trade. One of the things that I talked about on the show somewhere in the recent episodes was about a lot of comments or thoughts about what, the level of experience that Briere had. What do you mean an experience? He's a smart hockey guy. Or, well, how do we know he's good at the job? He hasn't done anything. And I said that's the answer right now is
right.
I don't know the answer to whether or not he's good at this job or can do it, because we have no track record.
Now we do.
And you couldn't draw up a better first trade for Danny Briere to really earn the trust of everybody who is around this thing, within and fans of, and everything that goes with the organization. If you are within it, if you are part of the whole process, if you are a fan, you should feel very comfortable with the type of trade that Danny Briere made for his first trade, and feel like now, let's see where the rest of this goes. Like, and this is a good place to tie back the Carter Hart thing for a second,
right.
because I will say one thing that I will say, and I don't even know if I have this written down in my notes on like all the stuff that we kind of know about rumors and all that stuff like that, but doesn't it make, now that you know what he was able to do for Provorov, doesn't it start to make you at least a little bit curious about, well, what happens if he says like what's the best that he thinks he can do for Carter Hart, or what's the best, like, and I'm not like, again, he's not actively trying to put together deals, but if somebody wants to get that desperate, you're sitting there going, what's the point where he sits there in his mind and says, I'm willing to push the button.
So the only thing that I think it's kind of a two-pronged issue, I think, holding up a Carter Hart deal.
Okay.
There are a reasonable number of goalies available.
Mm-hmm.
Connor Hellebuck may be available. There are several names around the league where the goaltending may be shifting around a little bit. John Gibson may be available. You never know.
There's an easy counter to that point, by the way, but I'll let you finish.
He's younger than all those guys.
That's one.
By a friggin' long shot, under better team control.
Right.
Right. The other issue, and this is something that we're probably not going to get a resolution. Well, we might get a resolution on it in a couple of weeks here, is Hockey Canada.
Right.
And that is the obvious answer. And obviously, we're not going to dive super far into it right now because there's really not a whole lot of new information yet. But
right.
Obviously, that is something that could hold up any sort of deal for him until teams know what's in those reports.
You're not wrong. Here's where I'm trying to go with this. So, because for the in the immediate after the Provorov trade, for probably about 24 hours,
we thought it was like imminent. We thought Carter Hart was packing his bags.
There was a lot of talk like it was imminent, and as if the whole investigation didn't exist. Like,
right. I heard Edmonton. I heard Toronto. I heard well,
and I don't doubt that some of that's still potentially true.
Oh, sure.
But now we're 2 weeks ahead of the Provorov trade and the first mention of this, and I still feel firmly about this, because I'd said on air, one of the things I said on air was before all of that came out, like before all of the buzz after the Provorov trade came out, I would have told you that, there's always a chance, nobody's safe. I'll give it a 20% chance that he gets moved, but probably, they value him a lot. They see him as a starter. They see him as a franchise goalie. I don't see them actively doing anything. And it goes back to the discussion we had, right? Not actively shopping him.
Sure.
And I came away from that day thinking it feels a little bit more 50-50 now, doesn't it? Like, right. I don't want to give a majority percentage that, like, oh yeah, he's definitely on the move, but I don't want to definitely write it off anymore either. Like, there's a lot of reasons to not.
It felt like Danny Briere was doing more than just passively making it known that he might be available.
Or that he was just like, yeah, I'll listen,
Right.
Now, I still believe this, even after all of this, the last 2 weeks plus of everything since the Provorov trade and the possibility that they were working on a deal involving Carter Hart, I still don't think they want to trade him.
I agree.
I still think that they want to keep him. I think there are obvious hurdles that we've discussed. We just already mentioned them. The Hockey Canada investigation is one.
You can't sign him to a long-term contract until you know what's up with that.
For sure. And of course, the other part, and this is the part that probably is very relevant to the Flyers in this portion, is the part where he's a 24-year-old goalie that's proven he can start.
And is probably going to be a very good goaltender if he gets the opportunity to play at the NHL level.
So they're not going to give him away for nothing. They're going to, but we've talked about this a little bit. Now is especially the time. We're a little more than a week away from the NHL draft. This is where things are going to heat up on a lot of fronts. If you are going to see significant trades made, they are going to happen by June 28th. And that's where we are right now.
Yep.
And I definitely don't feel like we're going to get any crazy resolution to the Hockey Canada stuff by then. That would be pretty extreme of the NHL to do that.
Well, aren't I believe there is some report is scheduled to be released in the next week or two here, and it had been held until after the Stanley Cup had been awarded.
Because a player who was involved in the whole thing was also on a Stanley Cup roster. So there you go. You know.
So how much do we learn within the next 2 weeks here?
I don't know if we learn enough or if we get what we want.
But I don't know if we can get enough clarity to make a move like this. That's what I'm saying.
That's what I'm, and that's where I was headed. Is I don't think we're going to get enough information or get the report that you want to see in the next 2 weeks, and therefore
Carter Hart at the trade deadline.
I think that there's going to look. You're going to hear his name for he's going to turn into one of those players. You're going to hear his name for a long time.
Yep. Until there's a deal inked.
And one of the things that I kind of said about Carter Hart, just in general, and I'm removing the Hockey Canada thing for a second.
Sure, we have to.
No,
we have to.
But and you know what I mean by saying that. I'm not trying to erase it from the situation.
Because if the Hockey Canada thing comes out negatively, his career's over.
Well, that's true. We will.
So we have to go on the assumption that if his hockey career is going to continue, that the Hockey Canada reports come out in a light that is in favor to Carter Hart. We have.
He wasn't part of it, and
exactly,
and his name is clean as his agent said in that.
Because the other side of it is awful.
Yeah, you ruined your career pretty much. I know.
Yes.
But so my point though is that the amount of rumors that he's involved in, but we had this discussion when we were talking about it. He's not the same as Ivan Provorov going into this because Provorov is 2 years older. You start to factor in things like, okay, let's just hypothetically say this is year one of the rebuild coming up, and it's going to take 4 years. Like 2 or 3 seasons is generous. Like you would love to be through a big chunk of it by then and contending for playoff spots in 3 years. But let's say 4 to 5 is really the predictable or average length of something like
that you expected,
right? So let's say, but let's go on the shorter end and just say 4 years, just for the hell of it, right?
Yeah.
In 4 years' time, Ivan Provorov's going to be 30, and he's been playing since he was 19 years old.
Yep.
So he'll have 11 seasons under his belt, which is a lot of mileage
and some horrendous injuries.
And Carter Hart will have been by that point. Okay, he'll be 27. He'll be 28, 29. Didn't start in the league until 20. Little bit less mileage. Maybe you don't, if you see him as a guy to build around, you probably don't start him 60 times a year in a season that is lost. You probably manage him a little bit better.
And I trust Danny Briere far more than I trusted Chuck Fletcher for that sort of thing.
And so, he's one of the few, and believe me, it is a short list. He's one of the few who you can at least look at and say, you know what? On the other side of whatever this turns out to be,
he could be there.
He could be there. Just about everybody else who's not like a rookie from last season.
I was going to say, it's basically Joel Farabee, Cam York,
Noah Cates, Morgan
Cates. And you know what? Honestly,
Frost is a tricky one too, by the way.
I love Noah Cates and Morgan Frost for where this team is currently at, but at this point in time, I don't see them on a playoff roster. Not in a role that is substantial enough to justify keeping them for the next 4 years, because you're just going to end up overpaying them.
There's an element of that where I understand where you're coming from and can see it with Frost. I think that what Cates did in his first full season provides a good foundation for something that I think he can change your mind in 3 years.
You think he's a top 6 player? Like on a legitimate roster. I'm not talking about on this garbage. Because he'll play in the top 6 this year, I'm sure.
I think he's got a ceiling that could be that high. I think that he becomes one of those guys that you would love it if he developed fully into like a good 2C. If he ends up being a really good 3C on a more loaded roster when you decide it's go time, that also works. Because he's one of these guys to me that is never going to be a problem. He's taking coaching from one of the toughest coaches in NHL history. He's thriving under it, and I think that he's also the type of guy that looks at the situation and goes, "This could actually work really well," because he's younger. He knows that it's early in his career. Is
he just Scott Laughton?
A little bit, potentially. Okay. I mean,
and I like Scott Laughton. If you've been listening to the show, you know I love me some Scott Laughton.
I mean, I want, you know what? I don't know. You know what? I'll tell you why that's a hard question to answer, because I don't know what Noah Cates' scoring ceiling is yet.
Okay.
I feel like we know enough about Scott Laughton to know, even in
what he's going to do offensively,
even in a career year that he just had points wise and all that, we still know what the ceiling roughly is. I think that Noah Cates probably has a.
You think he has another gear?
I think he's got a greater ceiling in every area because it's only year one, and you can't deny the fact that over the course of year one, he
got way better.
Well, he got way better because they kept asking him to do more against tougher players. I mean, I think it's incredible. You know, he had to play a game. I think that this is the biggest compliment you can give him in his rookie season, his first full rookie season. They played a game against the Edmonton Oilers, and as good as Carter Hart was that night, also. You're going against Connor McDavid for 65 minutes, and then it's a shootout afterwards. But 65 minutes.
Yep.
They gave up one goal that night. And again, whether it's, you can say a lot of it was Carter Hart, but you can also look and say, you know what? Somewhere in that, you're not going to play perfect against Connor McDavid. But you are going to do what you can to limit, and that includes penalty killing. That includes, 5-on-5 and 3-on-3 and all.
And especially this season.
He's so good.
Especially this season, because he was a marauder.
Exactly.
He went bananas.
All right, so do you want to get into player number 2 here on this list? We want to get into Scott Laughton because we just brought him up.
Yeah. He's. I think he's the less fun one. But we'll get there in a minute.
Well, this is the second of the 3 names that probably would be the biggest returns, probably. And then there's 2 more that we have to provide updates on because we know where we're going with this. But okay.
So Scott Laughton.
There's been some interesting things here. I think you're going to hear Laughton's name at every popular trading period until his contract's up or until a deal's done.
And that's a shame because I kind of want him to stay here. I kind of want him to be.
But you get where I'm going
the rebuild vet.
But you get where I'm going with that, right? I'm sitting here looking at 3 years left in the contract, and I'm going, you're hearing it now. You're going to hear about it at the deadline. You're going to hear it next offseason. You're going to hear it at the deadline if he makes it through that. You're going to hear it at the following offseason. You're going to hear it at the deadline again. And that's at the very least. I don't think, you're not getting to the third offseason and the contract's up, and now what do we do? The very least, you're going to hear about it, and I think the end of the road is bare minimum the last trade deadline of the contract. Bare minimum.
I agree. I doubt he walks for nothing.
I get a strong sense that it's probably going to be a little sooner than that. I don't know about this year.
He's picking up interest. That's the thing. We talked about it about a month ago, maybe not the last show, the one before that, and we talked about guys who should stay, and I think we both kind of talked about Scott Laughton as a potential rebuild vet, a guy who's here, to usher the new generation in.
So he's going to be popular. He's going to be wanted. Teams will pay a pretty penny to get a player like that on their roster, especially
for the playoffs.
Especially for the playoffs, but even ahead of a season. Right now, he's at 3 years left on a contract at $3 million per.
Yeah, it's a lot of money for those cap teams.
But there's it can be, but that's also manageable today. Yeah. But it only becomes more manageable when you go to 2.5, 2, 1.5.
Especially once we start getting into those retention time frames. 3 is a long time to retain, but 2 is pretty manageable depending on where your rebuild's at.
Right. Now, the challenge in trading Laughton is that there was a rumor that was already out about him that the Flyers turned down a late first round pick for him.
Wow.
Right now, within the last 2 weeks.
Wow.
Now there's always the possibility that this rumor is nothing more than stancing to try to make it seem like the Flyers aren't serious about trading him, or
trying to get a better price out of somebody,
or that if a late first isn't good enough, then nothing is. There's also the potential that the first that they were offered wasn't for this year, and that's where their focus is, and that's what they are targeting right now. So that's why they turned it down. I don't know at this point But I'd keep a close eye on Laughton over the next 10 days because he's clearly another player that has high value. I think one of the challenges you have with him, and this kind of goes back to something a little different with Hockey Canada this time, is Canada won at World Championships, like we talked about, right?
Yep.
And
Scott Laughton was a big part of that.
Well, and Adam Fantilli was on that team, right? And Adam Fantilli said, hey, Scott Laughton was great to me at World Championships. He's a great mentor. And all I can think about in thinking of that is, isn't that the guy you would want around when Cutter Gauthier makes his debut? Isn't that the guy you still want around for Tyson Forrester? Isn't that the guy you want around for whoever, even just...
I want Scott Laughton to be my old head.
And that's the challenge because, and again, as much of a leader as anybody on the team, Tortorella loves him. Like, you know that there are things that make this is like... I know that they sit there and they tell you after Provorov gets traded, it was a tough decision and all stuff like that. But there was also some things that said the writing was on the wall. Absolutely. This is legitimate. And well, Carter Hart would be too, as we just talked about. But this would also very legitimately be a very tough decision because Scott Laughton fits what you're doing. It fits both. He fits what you're doing now because he fits mentoring young players, almost like a player coach. But he also could be exactly what you need to move to get more value. Like it's kind of a win-win because I don't know if you come out of this on the wrong, I don't know if you make the wrong decision one way or the other. I think both are favorable. Well, but if it's a late first, it's hard to argue with late firsts,
One thing I want to postulate to you here.
Okay.
I feel like over the last couple of years with this team, and this is something I've talked about on this show before, there's been kind of two locker rooms. And it feels like we've had Scott Laughton's locker room and we've had Kevin Hayes' locker room. And that's not to say they don't get along, but you know what I mean. The guys who hang out with Scott Laughton and the guys who hang out with Kevin Hayes. I wonder what kind of message it sends if you trade Laughton first. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder if there's any, and maybe I'm wrong, but with a team that's going to be as young as this team looks like it's going to be, I wonder if that sends the wrong message to the room.
And that's a tough call because, like we said, I don't know what kind of Hayes is one of the ones where you don't have a lot of leverage. Obviously, it's kind of well known what that situation looks like.
He wants out in a hurry. Yeah.
I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer because you could also argue the same. I mean, it's different because the situations are also different, but it's a little bit like doing Provorov first too, because it's not.
Yeah, but I think if they're sending a message there, I think that was the correct message or the message that they were trying to send.
Probably, and I think that the point, but you get my point. Like, the easiest thing to expect would have been, Kevin Hayes is going first because we all feel like the writing's on the wall, and instead Provorov went first.
That's fair.
If nothing else, what I think that does is sends a greater message.
Well, sure. I think that sends the message that we don't need to move Kevin Hayes right away. We can do other things first.
Right. And also, well, I think the other point of that also is maybe don't move Kevin Hayes first because there's no leverage. Trade a player with leverage. Get a lot of what you want so that this way, because inevitably when Kevin Hayes, when probably leaning towards
I think Kevin Hayes is traded by about July 10th or so. When the teams who miss on a center need a center, I think you'll get some calls.
You want me to tell you when I think he's getting traded?
Okay.
June 29th.
Okay.
Because that's day 2, and I think that you're going to find a team that sits there and goes, you know what?
Do you get a first next year for him?
I don't know about that. I think there's not enough leverage. But
I agree.
I think somewhere around round 3, 4, it's not. Look, if nothing else, maybe in hindsight, be thankful Provorov went first because Provorov, being a player that had value from a playing standpoint or from a leverage standpoint because of what he's done, and they didn't have to trade him and all that type of stuff.
Right,
got you a huge package in return, and Hayes is not going to get you that. I mean,
no.
If it does, I'll be the first one to tell you how surprised I am and how impressed I am that it goes that way.
Well,
but
how long does Hayes have left? Is it 2 years?
3.
Oh, never mind. Okay.
And that's the problem. Now, granted, the other thing that plays into the Flyers' favor, though, is there are people out there that are going to tell you the free agent class is not very good.
Right.
And if that's the case, then okay, take your pick. You want to overpay for 7 years for a guy, or do you want 3 years at this price, knowing what it's locked in
with some cost certainty? Yep, and you know what you're going to get out of Kevin Hayes. We talked about knowing what you're going to get out of Scott Lawton.
Price will be locked in, and the Flyers are going to retain. You know they're going to retain.
Yeah. Now, that number will probably be down around $5 million. I'd say.
Well, right, and that's the point. Whether it's $2 million, whether it's half, whether it whatever it may be, they're going to retain.
If you're retaining half for 3 years, you're getting a first round pick or equivalent value. You have to be at that point. That's so much.
I don't think Hayes. I don't see any world in which Hayes gets a first round pick. What I do see is that Hayes, if you eat enough salary, could net you a prospect that maybe is somebody that you say that you say is interesting, that you feel like you can make use of. Like it's not going to be.
Sure, we could pick up some names, but
you know what I mean. I think the ceiling on draft pick is second.
I mean,
ceiling, and
honestly,
like at this, but like at this point, I think you take a third round pick for him and say, fine.
I agree.
If that's how it's going to go, because
if you can find someone who doesn't want you to retain, I'll take a third next year.
Well, exactly. Not only that, I don't think it's ever going to be like that, but I do think that if you can find somebody who's willing to give you even a third round pick, third, fourth for $2 million retained on that contract for 3 years,
I think you do it. Yep.
Because you know what the situation is going to be if you don't do it.
Right.
The situation, it's going to be terrible. It's not going to foster growth and development. It's going to foster more problems.
You're going to have to send him home.
I know.
You're going to have to send him to Lehigh Valley.
It's going to be very
waivers and yeah.
Okay, so we got to the Kevin Hayes part of this a little earlier than I thought. Do you want to say do we want to say the third name that we think could bring value?
So spoiler alert, by the way, that was one of the names that has to go. The last name that could go,
almost definitely going to go. It's
right. The last name that could go, possibly should go? ? Travis Konechny.
Right.
It's tough because it's a player I think we all like. We all like his offense. We all like his attitude, shall we say?
His edge. Yeah.
Sure, his grit,
edgy nature.
Right, his grit. Man, it's so tough because at this point, with where we're at, and Sean Couturier still being as big a question mark as he is,
yes,
Travis Konechny is your best offensive player.
Sure.
And it's a big piece. And frankly, I think it's a big piece that you need to move because I don't think this is going to come back and haunt me when he scores a Stanley Cup winner in 2029 or whatever. I feel like Travis Konechny doesn't I think he is what he is, and what he is isn't good enough.
Okay, interesting.
I think he's the best player on a bad team, and I think he's going to score all the points this year. I think he's going to look a lot like Dylan Larkin looked through most of the Detroit Red Wings rebuild.
Assuming he's here, you're saying, obviously.
Right. I'm talking through the first 50 games if he's still on the roster. 2 years left on the deal, or is this the last year?
Two.
Okay, it's 2 years left.
He signed the same offseason as Provorov. So
if he's not gone by the deadline, I think he's gone by next year's draft.
Okay, that's fair.
I think there's more value in getting him off your books this year, though. I don't know if they will, but I feel like you're gonna squeeze more value out of teams with an extra year at that cost control.
Yeah.
Given where it looks like the cap's going to be over the next couple, and it's looking like it's going to loosen up around it a little bit, especially that second year.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty sweet contract if you're a team on the edge. If you're a Nashville, I one of those teams who finished between 7th and 11th in the conference, like. Travis Konechny's a guy who's going to play on your second line, score you 25 or 30 goals if you put him with a good line mate. That should be worth a lot.
I hear you. I didn't think Kevin Hayes was going to be a good precursor to this, but it turned out to be a good precursor to this, and I'll tell you why. Okay. This one's simple. If you saw what Ivan Provorov can get you, Travis Konechny could do very similar if we're looking at performance value and contract. again, and this
probably
is where
better, honestly.
Well, and this is where the Hayes thing comes in for me, because we just said it with Hayes. If the free agent market isn't considered to be very good, and you have a player like Konechny who's available for the right price, you may try to get his remaining 2 years at $5.5 million onto your roster, and it isn't the overpaying and committing 7 years to a B-level free agent in the offseason.
Honestly,
that can only play into the Flyers' favor if teams think the free agent class isn't very good, and the Flyers have some short-term commitment players available.
Honestly, with the cap staying relatively flat, like it looks like it's going to, and a bit of a weak free agency class, Danny, it might be a really good year to ship everybody.
And here's the thing. This is good. Same thing with Carter Hart. I'm not sure how willing the Flyers are to do it.
Open for business.
I know there was certainly way more of a willingness to trade Provorov because it felt like tensions were high. The relationship was going downhill. We already hit on all that.
Yeah,
right?
it's Pride Month. We get it.
But the Flyers get what they like. The Flyers get what they want. Columbus got what they wanted. LA got what they wanted. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't feel that way with Konechny, like that there's a need to potentially make something happen. But again, this can be one of the pieces that maybe has as much value now as potentially ever in the rebuilding stage. And Konechny's the same age as Provorov, so you also have to consider that. You know, one of the things that I have, and I'm trying to remember. Well, I guess I'll get into this part when we get into the last player we have to talk about. Because that's where I really have this written down. But with Konechny, you're already at. I think you could have already asked that question about Provorov. I think you can ask it about Konechny. I think you can ask it about Hart to an extent. Is the value ever going to be higher during the rebuild in terms of from this year to next year? How much do you sacrifice if it doesn't go well?
Again, Hart's the only one I put the asterisk on for that, but otherwise, I completely agree with you. Yeah.
And do you know what? Like, I'm not trying to say this from a standpoint of like that. I think like I'm not trying to say Travis Konechny is replaceable in terms of like that you don't want those types of players. You
can find another Travis Konechny when your rebuild is close to being done.
No, what I'm trying to get at is this. I think the hardest position to get the firm guy is goaltending. Like if you draft a guy that you feel like you've got him, then you want to hold on to him.
Yeah, but is Sandstrom that guy? Is Sam Ersson that guy? Is Ivan Fedotov that guy? Like, we have some other quality options at this point. It's not like
who's the other Russian? Kolosov?
Yeah, so it's not like all the eggs are in the Carter Hart basket at this point.
Oh, certainly not.
And Danny Briere could draft a goalie this year. If you're looking at rebuilding,
guess what? Now I got 10 draft picks this year. I probably would.
I assume they're taking at least one.
I'd be willing to lay a wager that they will probably take a goalie in this draft. I think that would probably be advisable.
If the over-under was set at 1.5, I'd probably bet the under, but you never know. I'd splash the over maybe.
Do we want to talk about the last guy?
Okay.
I know you don't, but we have to.
Okay, go for it.
Well, because the other guy who is more or less likely to go. Well, and actually, I think the reason that we need to talk about this is because in the wake of the Hart stuff, because remember, like we said, it was Provorov and Hart, they're working on a trade involving Hart, and then everybody kind of went pump the brakes. There's a lot of hurdles. There's a lot of discussion.
Nothing is close.
Right. The news that kind of came out following that was that now the big focus was on Tony DeAngelo and being aggressive to try to move him.
Jettison him into the sun.
Well, so let me say this. So let me kind of clear the air on where the rumors are, because we do still have some other things to get to before the end of the show. I do think they are absolutely exploring trades for him. I think Briere, with a lot of control with the roster, obviously as the new GM, recognizes that this was a mistake, and not in the sense of all of the other things we talked about, or, with when he was acquired in terms of personality or history or baggage, like just in terms of the amount they gave up to get his rights and then the contract. And because Briere was just on, I watched this the other day. Briere was just on the Ray and Dregs podcast with Ray Ferraro and Darren Dreger.
Right.
And brought up the fact that he thought maybe too much of the last decade was too much patchwork. Really telling from a guy who actually worked for the team last year, and sat in the chair next to the guy who was calling the shots, and he's telling you.
And quite frankly, a decade ago, he still played for the team.
That's true. Well, no, he was still an active NHL player. He was not on the Flyers at that time. But that's fair.
Okay, sure, close enough. He still had friends on the team.
Fair enough. But you're right. In the amount, like, forget all the other stuff for a second. In the amount that they gave up to get the guy's rights, and then the contract, and now the ultimate fit within the system with John Tortorella, it's just not working. Similar to Kevin Hayes, this may be a case where you retain some salary, you take what you can get for him. It's going to be a lot easier to trade D'Angelo contract-wise versus Hayes because it's only 1 year left. On 1 year left on the contract, teams can much more easily navigate that.
Yep.
But it's going to be harder because here's the reason.
Because he's a giant prick.
I think that teams can see Hayes can be a good player and how his play dropped off late in the season. This can hurt Hayes' case too. But if you want to look at the numbers, I'm not going to tell you Hayes is bad. He played 4 seasons. Kevin Hayes has 4 seasons in Philly. His first season, 69 games played, 23 goals, 41 points. Pretty solid from your 2C, considering that you had 13 games remaining in a regular season that got cut short.
When we still had hope.
And he was probably on pace during that season, safely, at 23 goals, 41 points, for 50 points, 25 goals. Let's just just go to the nearest round number. Second season, 55 games played, 12 goals, 31 points. Obviously a dip. But that was a complete anomaly of a season because you only played the same 7 teams over and over again. Scheduling was all over the place. It was
only 56 games, right?
Right. It was a mess. Third season, 48 games played, 10 goals, 31 points. So first of all, same points total as the season before, fewer games. And once he returned from injury again in March, once they finally got him right, he played 28 games and had 7 goals and 15 assists for 23 points. Yep. So in his first 20 games, he had 3 goals and 8 points. In his last 28, 7 goals, 23 points.
Yeah, when he's been healthy, he's been a good player.
Promise, right? And then last season, his fourth, same thing, but in reverse. So 81 games, 18 goals, 54 points. It's pretty good for an overall body of work.
Yeah.
But look what happened after February, essentially after the All-Star game. He had 45 points in 50 games through January. From February until the end of the season in April, he played in 31 games and had 9 points.
And looked like garbage.
So it was clear what happened and how disinterested he became because, as we've heard, the relationship was bad between Hayes and Tortorella.
He how that played out. Hard enough to make the All-Star game and then absolutely mailed it in.
Then you go to D'Angelo, and D'Angelo didn't have a bad year points-wise. 42 was the third highest of his career. 11 goals was second highest. But he's just not a fit. And I'm not sure if they're going to make this happen now or if it's going to be more of a trade deadline play. But I do also think that they don't feel like him being on the roster to start next season is a necessity. He's available.
Get him out of here before he starts fighting teammates like he's done everywhere else.
Well, and that's, I think, the thing that they're weighing. Like, it's not like he hurts.
If you don't trade him, don't have him show up to camp.
Well, okay, and I don't know if I wrote this, if I completely wrote this down. Maybe I did earlier in the. Because here's the other thing about Hayes.
Because he's going to start punching rookies.
Well,
let's
hold
be
on.
honest.
Here's the other thing about Hayes for a second, because the Flyers are going to look to make this happen to potentially to try to get the trade and things like that. They're going, and we said they're going to have to retain salary. I know there have been a lot of discussions about would they buy out Hayes.
Okay.
I don't think they want to do that because it would be for me. Well, for me, that would have to be an absolute last resort. And I think Briere is again. This kind of goes back to the Provorov trade for a second and understanding what value is, and maybe making a big first statement with the Provorov trade also. That Briere is smart enough to know to take whatever the best offer you can get is, whether that means increasing retention beyond your starting point in negotiations, whether that means that the return isn't higher in the higher end picks. I think you know where the situation is, and you have to take what you can get rather than maximizing the trade because that could hurt you. D'Angelo, I wonder if they wouldn't, again, I think with D'Angelo, not the easy thing to do, but where they're at right now is we're still pre-draft and we're still pre-free agency and all that stuff. And the window is open for, because the buyout window is the way that the buyout window is. I think right now you're not trying to do anything buyout wise because you're going to try to do trade first. I think that's the obvious mentality.
Absolutely.
But I do think that if they go out searching and Go ahead.
Sorry, in terms of Tony DeAngelo, has any player been bought out more?
I mean, I'm sure there has been, but in total history.
I think it's already been twice, and he's like 26.
But I think that, like with Hayes, I think it's like the easier thing to do with Hayes is trade it for whatever you can get, because
Sure.
3 years left, and then when you buy it out, it turns into you're paying it.
God, he would be such a good third line center on the Boston Bruins for $900K after the Flyers buy him out. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong.
I don't know if it's going to be $900K, but you're not wrong about that part, maybe.
Bergeron, Krejci, Hayes down the middle. Charlie Coyle still on the team. Aye.
Well, then if Coyle's on the team, I don't know if he's the third line center.
Hayes is probably your 4C, and at that point, he probably is making $900K.
What about third line left winger?
Because he did play slow. Can he play left wing?
He played last year.
Yeah, for that team though.
Well, that's true. That's fair. Anyway, I do sense that maybe, you know, if buyout for Hayes is a complete 1,000% last resort, I think it's less of a last resort for DeAngelo. Like, I think that because you're not sacrificing that much, you're actually getting savings this year, and then next year you're going to be paying less than $2 million for one more year.
In a year where you're going to be nowhere near the cap and not trying to win.
Well, okay, but like, I want you to think. I want you to think about every player we've talked about so far, no matter who it is, because you can do the math on this no matter how you have to. Like, we know what Carter Hart's contract is, just under $4 million. Lawton's 3, Konechny's 5.5, DeAngelo's 5, Hayes is 7.14. We know that retention is going to need to be involved if you trade Hayes or DeAngelo.
Sure. And you may have to take some salary back somewhere for somebody at some point.
But if you've got guys like the other ones, maybe, I mean, Hart's a little tricky because Hart's a 1-year deal still, but it's club control. I don't think you're trading Hart with the idea that you're going to retain on him. I think you're trading Hart.
No, you're trading him to a team. Back. Yeah.
But with the other two, like with Konechny, let's use Konechny as the example here because he makes more out of the 3 guys that
he's the obvious answer, yeah.
But he makes the most out of the 3 guys that we said would probably have the biggest value. Don't you think if you're trading him, like let's even use the team that you gave. What if you're trading him to Nashville? Just hypothetically speaking. Don't you think you're getting back a player who probably makes at least $3 million?
Probably.
Just, to get a better pick or to get a better prospect. But you're probably getting a player who makes $3 million at least. So that at the very least, when it comes to factoring it in on the books, it's a $2 million change. That's what you're trying to do if you're a team who's gaining him.
Absolutely.
That's the hard part. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you have to look at any player, and the same goes for DeAngelo, honestly. Like, DeAngelo makes $5 million unless you're retaining half right up front, which theoretically speaking, you could do. It's 1 year. What's the difference? Still would be a savings to an extent, right?
Yep.
But chances are, like, I can totally see a trade for DeAngelo being a mid-range draft pick as the piece that you get that you want while retaining half of his salary and also getting a player who makes $2 million.
So
the team who gets him pays him $500,000.
Yep.
Basically.
Yep. And that's different than what they had. And that's the business of the flat cap NHL, especially.
And that's also what happens when you have little leverage. Like, you have to just accept it. If the best you can do is, hey, you remember, we trade, what was it, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th that we traded last year to get his rights? We can get the 3rd back if we also retain half the salary and eat another contract. I think you say sure.
The real asset you get in return is peace of mind.
Well, I did know, like, it wasn't lost on me how throughout all of this, if they're able to pull all of that off, meaning, okay, Provorov, there was some fracturing going on there as well. Like we said, the writing was a little bit on the wall.
Absolutely. And by the way, he's going to be an absolute killer with a change of scenery. He's going to be a monster, and we all know it.
I don't even isn't it crazy that I don't even I assume he's gonna play with Werenski, but I don't know.
I don't know. They got Damon Severson too. And they might not even be done.
Well, Severson, wasn't Jake Bean injured too, and that's another guy.
That defense is gonna be mean with Mike Babcock. Whew.
Well, funny enough, we're gonna get into him later in some of the conversations I have written down too. Apparently, okay. But yeah, I mean, that's the difference though. But if you're able to trade Provorov, we knew the writing was on the wall a little bit. We know Hayes, there's some fracturing there. D'Angelo, you know that there's issues there as well. To an extent, moving Hart in the middle of this, while there's a complete question mark with Hockey Canada involved, is another one, to be honest, if it was able to happen.
Right.
Like, but I'm sitting here thinking about it going, can you imagine if Briere does all of this in one shot?
He's going to look pretty good.
And essentially takes away a majority of your, kind of in a way, a majority of your problem guys to an extent. I'm not trying to call Hart a problem. We don't know if he, I mean, well, no, Hart could be clean. That's the thing. That still remains to be seen. But the other three, we knew, there's something going on. You know that there's, tension. Yep. You know that there's issues. So what happens if all of them are gone?
Just a whole bunch of pissed off former Rangers.
Anyway, all right. Are we on to that's the trade rumors?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, as we get into draft season, we'll be covering any deals that go down and all the other hullabaloo surrounding the team over the next couple weeks. And on that note, I did want to mention that we will be back next week with a that'll be a post-draft show at that point, right?
No, pre-draft next.
Oh, that'll be our pre-draft show. Okay, yeah, so that will be our pre-draft show. We will be looking at some more trade rumors, and we will be kind of breaking these things down even a little bit further,
depending on what we know. And the reason the other reason we're doing this is because we really don't have a lot of time right now with all of this news going on to talk about anything. Like, we're not even really talking 722 right now. We can't even get into it because there's just so much. Yep. So all right. Anywho,
in the meantime, we do have some front office news to get into.
Yes.
And the big news.
We want to start. I guess we should start at the top.
We're going to start at the top and work our way down. So one of the things we heard when Danny Briere and Keith Jones came in was about the brain trust, as it were, the 5-person unit. It was going to be from the bottom up. It was going to be John Tortorella, Danny Briere, Keith Jones, Val Camillo, and Dan Hilferty, and they were kind of going to be the group, the brain trust, whatever you want to call it, the think tank, the executive board of decisions. And here we are 6 weeks later, not even 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later.
Yeah.
And Val Camillo's gone. And I know she's not technically gone yet, but she'll be leaving shortly. And what's going on here, Kevin? Catch us up. What does this mean? What does this mean?
Well, there's a couple things to break down. It's first of all, this is very interesting, and there haven't been a lot of details out as to why this is happening, but you kind of hit the nail on the head with some of the big things. First of all, obviously, it was confirmed it's happening because there was a company-wide email at Comcast Spectacor that Crossing Broad had obtained that announced it to the company. So it is happening, effective.
They have good sources.
Well, they got Anthony Sanfilippo.
Yeah, they got the good sources.
So it's happening, and it's effective July 1st. So you're going to get through, ironically enough, you're going to get through the meat of the offseason. and then not that she has anything to do with the front, like the hockey operations department, but yes. So I guess to break down actually what it all means or whatever, because you're absolutely 1,000% right. To go through all of the song and dance that they did about a month ago, and now this happens, it seems strange. It doesn't sound like this was a firing. It wasn't phrased that way.
No.
It wasn't phrased.
It was phrased as she is leaving.
Right, and it wasn't phrased in any way that makes it seem like something happened or that a month into all this Dan Hilferty wants her out or anything like. I didn't get that sense at all. And it makes sense because it would make even less sense if you had the giant press conference make very clear there are 5 people in leadership, the new era of Orange, and then dismiss one of them immediately.
Yeah, that's a terrible look for your rebuild.
Now, that's why it's strange, because we don't have the answer completely, but it is entirely possible, and I think more probably likely, that she got some sort of opportunity somewhere and is leaving for that purpose.
She'll start somewhere by August 1st.
We'll see what further details emerge, but it is, again, it's a very strange timeline considering the big showcase.
How recent everything was, right?
Just a month ago before the announcement, before an announcement now that she's leaving. So there's not we're definitely not staying on this topic very long because there's not a lot of information.
We just don't know anything.
But we just know it's happening, and we know that from an optic standpoint, it's very strange because you just rolled out this big group. I mean, let's put it this way. What was the big picture? The big picture that was plastered all over the place was the 5 of them posed. And Keith Jones gets a jersey and Danny Briere gets a jersey, and they're holding them up like these are our 2 front office guys. And here's Dan Hilferty, who's going to be the new governor of the team. And here's Valerie Camillo, who's the CEO of the business side of things, and here's John Tortorella, our head coach. And okay, we knew Tortorella wasn't going anywhere. It's obvious Hilferty's not going anywhere, but okay, what happened here?
In all honesty, we'll probably never know. This is probably the last time we talk about this.
It'll be very well under wraps. You're right.
Because I doubt we'll ever hear anything. Because she'll leave, she'll sign sign 1,000 NDAs on the way out, and then she'll start somewhere new and sign a whole new batch of NDAs.
I think you're right about the fact that you won't hear it from her. I do think somebody
it could leak out eventually. That's
I think that somewhere along the line we'll get some dirt on this somewhere, but
too many people have too many ears and too many front offices for nothing to get out about it. That's fair. But regardless, as of this current moment, we don't really have any information there. Obviously, we all wish Valerie Camillo the best in whatever she chooses to do.
Well, and I do want to say like one thing, because like there was a lot of comments came in like good riddance and she was terrible,
I think she's been great for the franchise.
I actually think that she's done a lot of things that kind of brought back some of the foundational pieces that you needed. I don't think that I know there was a lot made about when she got hired too, because she was like, again, remember I even kind of went nuts about this when it happened, because I turned around, I said, this is all coming from the people that brought unatitude with the Washington Nationals. And because I thought that was stupid. And sure enough, like right after they left, that's when they won a World Series. So go figure, right? But and obviously that's not going to happen here. They're not going to win a Stanley Cup in the next 2 years. I would be very surprised.
If the 2001 Marlins can win a World Series, or was that 1999 Marlins?
No, 1997 or 2003.
That's it. There you go.
2 total rando years in the middle of being terrible.
Awful teams, and boom, here's a World Series. A couple years later, we're terrible. Boom, here's a World Series. Baseball's so weird. Anyway.
Yeah, I hear you. Do we want to get into some of the other people who are out and changing and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you break this down a little bit here?
Sure. Yeah. So this is before we get into, I guess, the 2 biggest pieces of news in the front office, because obviously there's some recognizable names we're going to get into in a second. Yep. But this all happened probably at least a week before, maybe a little bit more than that. Actually, I shouldn't say that. These are changes that happened before the trade had gone down, before Provorov got traded, because. This, to me, at least the department that was addressed, so needed to be addressed. Like it would, I think it's one of the major areas of concern within the organization. It was player development. The way
we talked about it a little bit earlier. Yep.
Well, we had talked about it on a recent show about how I had even said, I don't think that they draft poorly. I don't think you have that many people telling you your drafts are great and then don't pan out like that. I think you don't develop
except for Bobby Clark.
Well, yeah. But I had said on the last show, one of the things I thought that the team had to do was was more than just make changes to the roster and prepare to move forward, was find a way to make the most of the picks that they have and develop them properly. That's a huge step to rebuilding. It's a huge step forward. And this whole thing, these moves, which Mike O'Connell was kind of a senior advisor in this area in player development. He's out. John Riley and Shel Samuelson were very big parts of player development. They are no longer with the team either.
Shel Samuelson's been around forever.
Exactly. Yep. So Alan McCauley is promoted to assistant GM. he was kind of doing developmental stuff he was actually I'm sorry, no, he was director of analytics, I believe, previously. So he's assistant GM now. And I believe that the story was there, and a couple people had said this. I think Anthony DeMarco had this, and Tony Androkidis had this too. That McCauley was going to probably become the general manager of the Phantoms.
Okay, fair enough. And that is a role that an assistant general manager often takes.
Yeah. Riley Armstrong is going to director of player development. Nick Schultz, assistant director of player development.
Good old Nick Schultz.
I know. A recent player, though, I will go there because
we'll get into more recent players in a second.
Yes, we will. But I do think this is a huge step forward in terms of specifically with the people who are out, because you're taking a very old school guy in Mike O'Connell out of the picture, and then like you said, Shel Samuelson's been around forever,
He's kind of been the center of the player development
and look,
department.
And again, it's as with a lot of these business decisions, Shel Samuelson's a great guy.
Oh, sure.
But sometimes,
none of our comments reflect these people as people.
Sure.
Absolutely.
But this is why it's a huge step forward, because it's a recognition of a problem. What do we say about things like that? The first step of fixing a problem is admitting you have one.
Self-awareness.
Right? So
absolutely.
It is understanding that for some reason the way it was done isn't working and wasn't getting you any closer to contending. So you take the steps necessary to make it better. And
they are gutting the organization from the top to the bottom
in so many ways. Yep. And I give, again, this kind of goes back to full marks to Danny Briere. And look, I do want to go back and kind of amend something from even when we were talking about the Provorov trade, because Danny Briere's name, again, his name is kind of slapped all over all of the stuff and all that.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
I am already ready to put Dan Hilferty's name in the rafters.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. Just even if it doesn't work. Because essentially the first thing he did was kick Bob, Bill, and Paul out on the streets of Voorhees, or Margate, more likely. And we're gutting it. We recognize that there's a problem. He's not leaving room for any bad apples. He's just shaking the whole tree down and starting over.
Well, and I think the reason you feel so comfortable saying what you're saying is because when you start hiring people with titles that are reminiscent of the titles that those people had, and it sounds like they're not going to be part of it like they used to be.
And think about it. Was there ever this level of turnover when they were there?
Probably not. I mean, well,
never, ever.
We're going to go into this as we get to the other part.
Okay.
Because I have a point for why they're doing this. Let's not bury the lead with the
Let's bring in all the former Flyers. We mentioned Nick Schultz a minute ago.
Yeah, but at least he's been here for some time. It wasn't brand new.
But we get some good little titles out of this. Patrick Sharp and John LeClaire are special advisors.
Special advisor to hockey operations is the official title.
Assistant to the GM, yes.
Kind of, in a way. Well, kind of, no. It's
whatever Dwight Schrute said. Assistant to the regional manager.
Assistant to the assistant regional manager.
Right.
Was, right?
Right. So we get a little... Okay. I'll tell you how I reacted to it in real time.
Sure. And I want to hear your take, and then I have my thoughts on both of these guys. So let's go ahead and get it.
So these hirings happened a day apart. Sharp came out a day early. And I didn't hear anything early. I just heard that as it publicly broke, obviously. I don't have any sort of inside track. I don't know if you do, but I heard... Not
really with hirings, because hiring... Well, and let's be real about something, too, because...
When somebody gets offered the job, they say yes, then they announce it.
Well, kind of, but also when Keith Jones got hired in the president role, that was kept very close to the vest. Remember how there were tons of names floating around in the beginning, and then
I think if Keith Jones' name had gotten out there, he would have withdrawn.
He didn't want it out there.
That's what I'm saying. I think if his name had trickled out early, he would have withdrawn.
He made very clear. I actually just saw a clip from I think it was the Flyers Talk podcast that Jordan Hall does for NBC Sports and things like that. They had Al Morganti on there. Like, when did you kind of know that Keith Jones might be up for the job? Because they obviously do WIP together or stuff like that. And Al said when he stopped calling me back, because as soon as he dropped off the grid for a week, I knew something was up. And
fair enough.
But that's the point. He kind of dropped, like, other than doing TNT, he was like, that's it.
Which was still weird all the way through the Stanley Cup Finals. Still strange.
But before we get to these two, then can we mention, speaking of the end of the Stanley Cup Final, can we mention Wayne Gretzky giving the words of encouragement there?
Awesome.
Which was so cool to hear. And
yeah,
look, Gretzky was great on these things, obviously.
But he buried Biz every chance he got.
But the cool part was, like, it's one thing to wish the guy luck and say, we know you're going to do great and things like that.
We wish you the best.
Right. But to throw in also, I know Mr. Snyder's looking down. He knows he's not the right guy. Man. Like, let's remember something. Wayne Gretzky never played for the Flyers ever, right?
I want to give Wayne an immense amount of credit, because he has come a long way in the last 24 months since ESPN and TNT got that contract. He was a little quiet. He was a little reserved, but he was always like that as a player. And he is still quiet. He is still respectful. but he's letting his personality out. He's having some fun. He's talking when the game's third overtime is almost over. He's talking about thank God it ended, or I'd be sleeping back here. He started really letting some of his personality go. And we do love to see it out of Wayne.
I know that I also do, in addition to doing the show with you and all that stuff like that. I know that I do work for a website and a radio station that has 4 letters after its name. That is also
some pretty big letters,
right? Yeah. That is also a network that has the rights to the NHL. That's one of the 2. TNT's pre-post, all that type of stuff blows ESPN's out of the water.
Oh
that panel in the Cup Final with Gretzky, Biz, with Gretzky, Biz, Anson Carter, and Henrik Lundqvist. By the way, isn't Henrik Lundqvist just the likely Of course he's good at this.
Of course he is.
Because
like Patrick Sharp was good at it.
Well, but hold on a minute. Of course he's good. He was a great goalie. He was the best dressed guy in the league. He's still one of the best dressed guys in the league.
My favorite ongoing bit, by the way, is that Henrik Lundqvist won't tell Biz where he gets his haircut.
Because he doesn't want him going to his guy.
Well, because he doesn't want Biz tweeting it out is the problem. Right. Look where I just got this sick fade, brah. Tag. Henrik Lundqvist's place is ruined forever.
But isn't it just so obvious that Lundqvist would be good at it? He was good at everything else. He's the best dressed guy in the league. He's the best. He's one of the better look. He's a great looking dude.
It's infuriating how perfect he is.
I know.
Anyway,
but it's an awesome panel. Let's go back to this.
Great.
Patrick Sharp. Sorry. So
speaking of handsome panelists, Patrick Sharp.
Right. Okay.
So anyway, the announcement of Patrick Sharp came out, and my reaction in real time was, "Oh, that's neat. I liked Sharpie. He was a fun, he was a fun little guy on that Phantoms team, and he was fun."
Listen to you. I like
good old Sharpie. Hey, Sharpie. And then the news the next day came out about John LeClair, and I went, all right, listen.
All right.
I love John LeClair, and I do. I grew up a child of the Legion of Doom. I grew up watching Eric Desjardins was my favorite player until about 2008. So,
why did I think you loved Lindros more?
No, you have not listened to the history of this show very well. No. I think Eric Lindros is possibly the single most overrated flyer in Philadelphia Flyers history.
That's right, because you had big love for Claude Giroux when we were doing those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Giroux against Lindros.
Absolutely.
Right? All right. Anyway, I guess you want my reaction to everything in real time, so to speak.
Yeah, because I do love LeClair.
But... All right, let's start with Patrick Sharp first, because he was hired first. By two whole days or a day and a half or however you want to look at it.
Right.
From a hockey perspective, this is a good hire. He's the type of player recently enough removed from playing to know how to help develop younger players and where the game is going. Again, like you mentioned, being a broadcaster and analyst, that helps your knowledge base. The one obvious blemish in the hiring is that he was a member of the 2010 Chicago Blackhawks.
Yeah.
That's it. Listen, I can understand if that's a deal breaker for people. I can understand if you don't like it for that reason. But as much as that's a problem on the Flyers' part, that's a problem on the league's part, because every year we go through the song and dance of Joel Quenneville and Stan Bowman went back in and are going to meet with Bettman about reinstatement.
Yeah, and for the record, I don't hold it against you if you think Patrick Sharp is the scum of the earth because he was on that team and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Look, I certainly understand that logic.
Too. I understand if it's a deal breaker. Let me ask you another question based off of that. Then, who's the GM of the Winnipeg Jets?
Kevin Cheveldayoff.
Okay, so it wasn't a deal breaker there either. And unrelated to this particular story,
to be fair, he was hired as the general manager of the Winnipeg Jets before we knew about that.
He
remains in that job.
Despite that was the point. Despite it, it wasn't enough for them to say, well, we're going to change it anyway.
Right.
No, okay, that didn't happen.
Joel Quenneville's about to get a job, so who knows?
Well, how many jobs are left? In fairness, there's a lot of them that have dried up since.
That's fair. That is fair.
And unrelated to this particular story, but you've already mentioned him on the show a couple of times because we had Columbus discussions. So, look at who else is about to get another coaching job. Mike Babcock's coming back in the league. So, this
to be fair, though, his was a little more tame than the Chicago Blackhawks.
Probably, but it doesn't
he was
make
a bit of an old-fashioned coach.
Who took it a little farther than some of the old-fashioned coaches do.
That is fair.
But where you get where I'm going with this, it's not a Flyers exclusive thing. The league does this, and we've talked about it. And I can talk about morals in sports until I'm blue in the face. It's not going to change how any team seems to approach things. Whatever. We can talk about it until we're blue in the face. Obviously, it doesn't matter to many teams, right? It just is what it is. All right, let's go back to the other angle then, because the more popular angle was, let's talk about if you're playing the former Flyer card, because if you are on Patrick Sharp, I kind of can't level with you here. Patrick Sharp's biggest claim to fame as a Flyer is that he was traded young, wasn't given much of a chance, and for years they felt like he felt like a player that got away. I can't look at players who have he's got 66 games as a Flyer. Okay, if you're the person out there who if even playing one game in a Flyers uniform is a deal breaker for you, then and that's your opinion, and I get where that comes from, but this goes back to, I want to go back to what we talked about at the president hire, and that there were going to be names out there in the search that you were going to hear that you would probably be able to associate as former Flyers, or they played and blah, 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 but they aren't. You have to consider the context behind former Flyer.
Right.
And what's their recent history with the Flyers to an extent. Remember, Scott Mellenby fell into this category. Robert Esch fell into this category. Yeah, they played here. But when was the last time you can remember them having ties to the organization? Because
it's been a while.
Right. And Sharp is the same way. This isn't even having somebody like Briere or Keith Jones who were around the organization for years before they got hired.
I think it's more, it almost feels like if the resumes are blank, Patrick Sharp doesn't get hired. Right? If the resume is filled, but team names are changed.
Right.
Patrick Sharp doesn't get the job. And I'm not necessarily saying that's the case here. But because on his elite prospects page, Philadelphia Flyers appears, that's a tiebreaker. That's an edge. And I don't know if that was the case here. I don't know.
I'll tell you what a greater case for here is than that. What did we say when Keith Jones got hired? Dude knows everybody. And Patrick Sharp was working for the same network as Keith Jones was, and it's hey, you know what? If you got the guy on, I wouldn't say he's on speed dial, but if you got the guy in your contacts list and you're thinking, hey, what are you up to?
Sure, and I imagine
maybe you give a phone call.
And I imagine that in this circumstance, that is probably the origin of this job.
Well, and also in fairness, okay, so if Keith Jones knows everybody and can easily call anybody, Danny Briere also played at the same time that Sharp did.
Sure.
They played in a Stanley Cup Final against each other.
Right.
Maybe that's a name that crosses Briere's mind, too. Hey, you know what? He's just over here. He was broadcasting in Chicago a little bit. Want to see what he's up to? Maybe he's interested in helping us build a team. The guy, you can't take away for all the other stuff that we said with the Chicago side of things. He's got 3 Stanley Cups on his resume.
That is fair.
I think that if you're looking for better ways to develop players, you're looking for championship pedigree, and you're looking for guys who, and Sharp wasn't even, another great case here for Sharp is he wasn't exactly top pick material. He was one of those finds that
he was a diamond in the rough that somebody developed late. Right.
Yes.
But the thing is, like I said, it's not so much about the fact that he was a Flyer is a problem in the hiring specifically. It's just that it seems like
you look for that, or it jumps out off the page.
Every single person you've hired is a former Flyer.
Well, all right, so let's get into
even if they're just technically in the Patrick Sharp sense.
The reason I'm saying this is because my stance on this changed a little bit with the second hiring. Because when it was just Patrick Sharp, I'm sitting here going, stop playing that card. We're talking 66 games. They didn't
it's not a big deal.
Well, the point is okay. So they had Keith Jones, Danny Briere. It's not like they followed it up with, hey, Eric Lindros is going to be doing stuff in the front office now.
And then they hired another part of the Legion to do.
No, but as rumored as that was,
yep.
It's not like they started there. They hired an ex-player who last played for the team in 2006.
Yep.
And is better known in his playing career for another team. That didn't bother me.
Right.
John LeClair comes into the picture. And I will say to you on the show, I will say to the listeners on the show what I sent.
On the public record.
Well, what I sent to you in the group text as soon as it happened, which is I want to start this whole thing off by saying I love John LeClair.
I love John LeClair.
When this news came out, I was sitting in the same spot I'm sitting right now. I'm sitting at my desk in my office, and I will even show you the direction that my eyes went. Because I turned, I saw it on my screen, and I went like this. And I looked up at the picture of the Legion of Doom that I have hanging on the wall and thought, okay, that guy's going to work for the Flyers now. Okay. This was without
Michael Renberg. Start looking for places in Philly, baby.
This was without question. This was my first favorite Flyer. It's kind of impossible when, like, as a kid in the 90s, it's impossible to not
love John LeClair.
To not be infatuated watching a player who can score 50 goals regularly, who's an all-star, an Olympian for U.S. hockey,
and a handsome son of a gun too.
With that being said, I can understand how you can look at Keith Jones for how the role was defined and want to put him in place there. The president was kind of going to be a bit of a marketer. He's going to be a talker. He's going to kind of try to get his message across. We certainly knew the credentials that Danny had coming in, even without the experience. We knew he was on that path, and it kind of
Mariners, et cetera, et cetera.
And it got accelerated when you decide we're done with Chuck Fletcher. That gets accelerated, obviously. Sure. You could even see it with Sharp, because everybody, with Patrick Sharp, everybody has to start somewhere. He was still an active player 5 years ago, but LeClair's been retired for a good amount of time.
Yep,
and he's been around in an alumni capacity,
right?
And he's involved with 3 Ice, which is a 3-on-3 league, but that's really it. He hasn't exactly been somebody known in a hockey operations department before. So
I wonder if certain people were keeping him out.
That's an interesting question. I didn't really think about that, to be honest, but good point. But it does absolutely feel very old school Flyers to hire one of your former players on the merit that he was once a great player in your organization. And
he left on kind of bitter terms, didn't he?
LeClair?
Yeah. Did he not?
Not really.
Okay.
I just think that there was I don't want to say there was anything that was like bitter terms or anything like that. I think that there was maybe at the time. I'm trying to think of the best way to put this, because LeClair and Lindros were so much at the hip together that when things were bad with Lindros, I think a little bit of an element of that rubbed off on LeClair, because I think they stayed friends throughout, obviously, and things like that.
They're still
I think
friends
a little bit
like
wasn't it obvious that once that was all patched up and things like that, that they had to go into the Flyers Hall of Fame together.
Steve Dangle tells the story on his podcast, by the way. John LeClair drives the 8+ hours to Toronto every year for LeClair's. Yep.
Yeah, I know.
Every year.
It's amazing.
So they're still great friends to this day.
Well, Lindros is kind of a timely reference here, because the Hockey Hall of Fame announcement is coming on Wednesday of this week, but Lindros has spoken to make a case for LeClair, which he's got an interesting case. He's over 400 goals. He was, an elite player in the game for a good stretch of time, like for a 6-7 year period. He was one of the elites.
And there are certain era-adjusted folks who are strongly in favor of John LeClair making it, given when he played and the numbers he put up in the era he put them up.
There are a few. I mean, look, I'm not saying that he wouldn't be deserving. He's already in the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame to begin with.
He's got a ring.
He does also. That's true. There are a few names for Hockey Hall of Fame that come to my mind before LeClair that I think are long overdue. I'm pretty sure that the voting has already happened and the decision's already been made on this type of stuff, and they're just announcing it this week. But I sure hope that Alexander McGillney gets in. I hope that Rod Brindamore gets in. I think that I do think that even from a Flyer standpoint, I think there is a strong case for Brian Propp to get in.
Okay, fair enough.
But I do hope that the first two I said better be in this class.
But okay.
But let's go back. So it is
back to the LeClair hire.
So like I said, it feels very old school, and considering that you have Keith Jones who played with him, and Sharp did briefly, like there's people who are gonna vouch for him and back this up, and like that feels like the old way, right? Like it's really doubling. Oh, here we go, another Vegas gambling term. It's really doubling down on what the Flyers have already started. Because on the surface, when it was Jones and Briere, I like when they made the announcement, I wrote one day with no media availability and just the announcement that it felt too similar. And then they had the press conference and it actually did feel a little different. But at the same time, it felt the same in a sense too, because it was done. That press conference was pomp and circumstance, and but they also officially termed it a rebuild and officially entered a new chapter, and we're trying to leave an old chapter behind. But now you can start to bridge together some of the things like that day with these hirings. Hilferty brought up the ex-player thing, and like the two best candidates happen to be ex-Flyers, and Tortorella passionately defended it as only Torts can. And now I think you know why, because I think this is how they were going to approach this. And in doing so, this is what's really big. This is where the double down thing really comes in for me. That this isn't taking four people and saying do the job. You're taking four people that I think are popular with the fans in some capacity. Yep. Jones, beloved as a broadcaster and in his brief time as a player, because he had a good personality for
Does anybody call him anything other than Jonesy?
I don't think he wants to be called anything other than Jonesy. It's like Coatsy.
If you walked up to him and said, "Hello, Keith,"
do you
he'd look at you like you had four heads.
Well, seriously, do you think you walk around and when Steve Coates is parading around the building, do you think anybody's called him Steve?
Steve. Hello, Mr. Coates, sir.
It's pretty easy. Hey Coatsy, this is Jonesy, that's the only way. Okay, so beyond that, Danny Briere, Mr. Playoffs himself. Leclerc on the Legion of Doom was an absolute fan favorite. Yep. Sharp was maybe not necessarily didn't have the time to become like a fan favorite player per se, but was always one of those players that in years past, everybody was always sitting here going, well, look what he did. Look what he turned into. What did we trade him for? And it's arguably one of the worst trades they've ever made in franchise history, because they got next to nothing back. Matt Ellison played 7 games.
Yeah, but that's a hindsight 2020 thing.
It is, but nonetheless. So all four of them are putting it all on the line that this is going to work, and there's no in between.
Yep.
It's either going to work, and every person who says it's the old boys club, they only hire former Flyers, they're all going to be completely silenced.
No, it's the new boys club. Get it right.
Well, whatever, but you know what I mean.
No, this batch is the new boys club.
Okay, fine. The younger boys club.
God, we listen. We can't keep saying the younger boys club on a podcast.
That's true. But everybody who says that is either going to be completely silenced, or this is going to fail spectacularly and prove everybody right. Right? I mean, if it doesn't work, I can only imagine that it could end. The first thing that popped in my head when I'm thinking about these guys putting on the line is Ron Hextall, because think about his perception from hiring to, I guess, post-firing, if you will, as more comes out about the type of GM he was. Changes how you view him, doesn't it?
Maybe a little, yeah.
Well, I don't think people are pleased with him.
That's fair.
I think the day he came in, it was, he's a former Flyer, but look what he did in LA. This doesn't work. And then as it didn't work, and then more stuff came out, it was like, oh, this was kind of awful.
I might die on the hill that that's not his fault.
I don't think it's completely, but I do think there were things that I don't think that that's out there just to be out there. I think
I understand. You
know why?
I think it's out there because certain people want it out there.
You know what? Hang on. I would have agreed with you fully if it was just here. Now that Pittsburgh has also gone the way that it did, I'm kind of thinking it wasn't a coincidence.
If it happens once, right?
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
It's a pattern.
Exactly. But and I don't remember. Did we start joking the same way? Because I'm in another group chat with friends from college, and we all immediately went into I'll even read a couple of them really quick because it was too good not to. Somebody turned around. One of my buddies goes, Jody Hull or Dan McGillis next in line.
God.
And now, by the way, do you remember around? I can't believe I'm going to bring this up on this podcast, but you probably know what this is, or you've probably heard of this. Do you remember how? And I'm going to show how old I am and how
I'm scared.
like how old I am and how little I know about certain things in pop culture sides of things.
Oh God, okay.
I guess there was a rap song that could be parodied. It was around the time of the 2010 Stanley Cup Final, and this local Philly rapper did a parody song called Briere, Betts, and Pronger.
I have not. Nope.
Okay.
Never heard of that. I imagine it's friggin' terrible.
It's awful, but it's also like a cult thing because
I was listening to my cousin from Ben Salem rapping around the same time, and yeah, I know about what I'm expecting. Yeah.
Okay. Well, either way, this was done. This Briere, Betts, and Pronger thing, and that was the joke that I was making, was that I'm like, there's only one right answer. Briere, Betts, and because Briere's already there, so it was funnier to put, let's do Blair, Betts, and Chris Pronger. Pronger actually makes a half bit of sense.
By the way, that's got to be Beamer, Benz, and Bentley, right?
I think that's what.
Okay, it has to be.
Okay, and okay, well, so at least you know the song. I don't even know what the hell they're parodying.
I'll send you a link.
No, I've listened to this, so I know how it. Like, I know
okay.
But I follow that up, right? But like, I follow up and make the joke also. I go, but hey, while we're at it, let's see what Kent Manderville and Marty Murray are up to. Like,
God.
like it was just. But
hey, has anybody heard from Andy Delmore recently?
He was an assistant coach somewhere and had a health episode recently. He had a heart problem.
Well, sheesh.
That's okay.
Hope Andy Delmore is okay.
That's okay. You want to know what Marty Murray's doing? Because I actually do know the answer to that one.
Okay.
Marty Murray is the GM of the Brandon Wheat Kings, which by the way, okay, I don't think that what the Flyers need to do is hire somebody who's going to be infatuated with the Brandon.
Who is responsible for Nolan Patrick?
Or just who likes the Brandon Wheat Kings as much as Ron Hextall did.
Right.
But either way, you get the point, right? Like that is the running joke. And in all seriousness, you're kind of not wrong about, hey, by the way, Michael Renberg, if you're around,
right,
you might get a phone call.
All right. You know, I think that is a great place to put a pin in that. We will be back next week with a pre-draft show. Is there anything else we had to put a pin in this week? Or?
Not really. I mean,
okay.
We're
getting off the rails here. We're almost 2 hours in.
We got through all of the stuff, though.
We're getting into a summer show. It's not going to get more coherent from here, folks. But we will be back next week with a little bit of pre-draft coverage, preview the trade window, free agency opening up, maybe a little bit. We got a lot going on. In the meantime, make sure to follow us on Twitter at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Follow us or find us everywhere you find your podcasts: Facebook, Instagram, Podbean, etc., sportstalkphilly.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're growing a little bit over there. We're trying to get those numbers pumped up. And in the meantime, that's it. Congrats again to Vegas. The 2023 season is a wrap. We look forward to the offseason. The rebuild is already thoroughly on its way, and honestly, by our next show, Travis Konechny might be gone. So
I was gonna say, if you were gonna hit me with the final thoughts before we get out of here, I was gonna give you just 2 words: buckle up.
Stay tuned, and we'll be back next week. So until then, 2 more words. See ya.